Hi, I'm Josh Ebner. Welcome to the PSEG Long Island Home Comfort Whole House Residential Heat Load Calculations Training Series. As a home comfort partner, you'll find this series an invaluable guide for properly sizing and selecting mechanical equipment for participation in the home comfort program. In this segment, we'll be reviewing the web-based version of CoolCalc software.
So now the CoolCalc is actually a free online software. To use it is free. To actually get the reports out is going to cost you per report that's in there. So relatively inexpensive, very user-friendly for the most part. If you're just getting started and you're not sure how to do it, it's very menu-driven. Overall, once you sign up for an account for here, which is free, you can get involved in using it. There are a lot of things that it's just going to ask you basically step by step to enter data. But as you see as we go through this and I show you, you're going to see that you need to change things that may not be readily apparent that will affect the heating and cooling calculation loads for the home. All right, so it starts off basically using a map, the Google Earth. So you're going to put your project name, the location, so it wants the exact address. If the address does not show up on a Google search, it will not be able to be done at this point. So you're going to put that in. You're going to use the design conditions. Now you can either do block load or room by room. The example that Josh gave you was a room by room calculation. That home also could have been done as a block load. A lot of times you can do it floor by floor. So if you have a ranch, you can do the entire floor as one entire room. If you have a colonial that's fairly uniform, you can do 2 floors, or you can do the entire house as the block. That's a block load in there. So this one was done. The example was done as a block load. So that once we choose that, it's going to ask you some information, basic information about the age, the number of stories, the number of bedrooms, same things you would put into the Elite or any other software, but you don't have to search for the tabs. So to get started with this, it's just asking you basic information. So does it have a basement? Does it have a room over a garage? And any skylights. So things you would normally model in the other software, it's just asking you right away. It's going to make a lot of assumptions based on what you choose and what you enter. So you don't have to actually adjust it, but you need to know exactly what the house is built similar to you need for the other softwares. Once you do that, again, you could choose the infiltration, whether you ran a blower door or not. You could enter the data, or you could choose the leakage category, and also wants to know the number of fireplaces, similar to the other software. Once you choose that, it's going to look at the construction profile, similar to how you would have to model it in the other software. This one just basically gives you step by step what's the primary structure, the framing material, the exterior finish, etc. as you go along. And once you choose that, it's going to set up all of the construction profiles. And if you notice here, this 12B-0SW, this is the same standard numbers that were used in what you saw in the Elite Soft package earlier. Now up here, it's not relatively intuitive to go from one to the next. So as you go through and continue to answer questions, you're going to go to this page, hit save. You're going to then choose which way you want to enter the square footage of the home. You could enter it by square footage like we did before, or this one has something you can actually do a map trace. So if you actually can't get to the house and you've gathered information from the homeowner about the information in here, but you can't get there, you can get an idea of the square footage by actually using what's called a map trace. It uses Google Earth to actually do this. So if you have to check on some things, or if you can't get there right away, you want to get a preview, you can do this first. So what it comes in is once you put in, say you do the map trace, it's going to give you an aerial view of the house. Now, if the house is covered with trees, it's going to be very difficult to do it this way because of this one. Depending on when they took the photo, is going to depend on whether or not you can actually do this. But if you've actually been to the house already, you know the square footage, you know the orientation of the house, you could still overlay it and do this way. But if you actually physically did the measurements yourself, you'd get a more accurate set of numbers by entering it as a room by room or floor by floor. So here we named it. I'm going to do this first floor versus second floor. So we got the first floor, average room height is 8 feet. So once you go in, you start clicking from one of the corners, and it shows you the roof line. As you click around and follow the floor footprint, and connect it all, it's actually giving you lengths of the walls. So again, this is going to be a map trace to do the entire floor at a time. So knowing where this, you would almost, from the area view, if you didn't know that there was a garage on the first floor here and that there was a closed-in porch, doing it just from this, you'd actually oversize the house and then oversize the equipment. But if you do know basically how the house is built, you could do it this way. So that's the first floor. Then the second floor is a little larger. The second floor actually goes over a garage, over a closed-in rear porch. It has an overhang in the back. So from this, the only reason I was able to do this because I was at this house and I know where the bump outs are and how the floors run with regard to what we're looking at. Once you're done, it's actually going to give you, once you're done the tracing, the full screen is going to give you the overall square footage for each floor. So if you've actually measured the house and you know the overall square footage, you can actually compare it to see how close you are with regard to that. Because sometimes the overhangs for the roof line, for any soffits that hang out overhang, may make the square footage even larger. So you have to be careful with that for oversizing everything. So now we're in dimensions. So we started with the project information. We went down to construction details. We did the dimensions. So we're going to now go look at the HVAC systems. Once you go down to that tab, because again, it's going to take you from one tab to the next, you're going to click the plus sign, and it's going to come up and ask you questions about the heating and cooling system in here. Is the whole house, I called this whole house because it heats and cools the entire house. It's heating and cooling. Does it serve the systems in the rooms, all the rooms in the project? You need to answer that. Is it ducted or ductless? And then down here is a very important, you'll see as you see later on, if you don't know anything about the appliances in the house, you can actually choose a standard in here, basically standard BTUs load in the house. So the new kitchen, utility room, additional storage, and lighting, about 3,400 BTUs. If you actually happen to know all the appliances, and it's highly recommended you enter the appliances individually, as we'll see later, you can choose custom and then change them. But to start out, just choose one of these that fits and get an idea of where you're starting at that point. All right, it's going to ask you again interior design conditions, similar to what you started with the Elite Soft. You can actually change these if need be, but they come up as defaults based on your location. Whether you have engineered ventilation, whether you have performance data for the blower for the heat, whether you could enter the motor watts in there, or you can say yes, use performance data, so it'll assume certain numbers. And then winter humidification. Do you actually have a humidifier in the house? That's for to do part of the calculations. Once you do that, once it's done, it's going to come up with where your ducts are. So you're going to actually locate the ducts. Now at this point, if you have an AC system or a heat pump in the attic that has ducts that go down through conditioned space as well as up in the attic, you can't choose the difference. So where the majority of the ducts are, above conditioned space, below it, above and below, or all inside conditioned space. So choose the one that best fits, and then you can, once we get this entered, we're going to go in and show you how you can adjust it to show, say it's 80% in the attic, 20% conditioned space. So the code year of your house basically is going to assume certain insulation requirements for the house at that point, what's standard in there, the tightness of the ductwork. So is it default sealed? Is it loose? Is it tight? And the R value. So if you've actually been to the house and seen it, you could actually put in R4, R6, R8. If you don't do anything, it pulls the code year from what you entered at the beginning. You have to choose the tightness, and R6 usually comes up as a default because it's an average in the middle. Once you're done, it's going to give you this printout, which basically gives you the cooling and heating loads that it calculated. Now, just sending this in is not good enough for the program. You would actually have to click the button to get the report, and you would have to purchase a report from them, and they get it to you. I think it's $5 per report to do that. And then they'll print it out and they'll have all the information we need for the program in there. So if we look up close at this, well, first this breaks down the windows, the heating, the infiltration. It breaks down based on how you modeled the house. So if we look at what we have here, this is basically for cooling is 35,000 BTUs, and for heating we need 70,000 BTUs. That was using all the defaults without really changing anything. So we're going to take a look at a few things that you really should go back and change. One other option that is there, which doesn't readily come up, is if you have hot water piping, especially in unconditioned space, whether there's insulation on it, how length it is, the ambient temperature of where it is. So if you have it going through an unconditioned crawl versus an unconditioned basement, there's different information you could add for heat loss with regard to that. Now this is what we had talked about earlier, which was the different parts. So initially it comes up when you enter the data, it's about above grade walls, and you can change some things in there if you click on it. The other ones, which if you don't do anything, like I said earlier, based on the initial data that you input, it's going to assume certain things. And when you assume certain things for most older homes, it's pretty relative. But for the house we're looking at, our renovation was done in 2005. So the standard ceiling data that it enters from 1953 is not true for this home because the second floor was added. So it originally calculated an R7 in the attic, but it actually is an R25 for when it was built. So you would actually go into, click on this ceilings word. It's not a specific tab, that's actually the tab. It opens up and you can go ahead and do the changes. So in here, when I click on floors, remember we clicked in, there was a floor over a garage or an open space and over the basement. Now over the garage, it assumes that there's no insulation. That's because it doesn't ask for any information. But if you actually click on it, here's the construction name. So default bonus room floors is what it comes up. You can name it whatever you like. Change the code year, because that actually was when the house was added. It was added over the garage that was in there. So floor over crawl space or garage, radiant floor heat, true or false, and it had it as R0. There's actually an R30 in there. So by changing this, you're going to change the heating and cooling loads that it calculates. So you really need to go into each one of these tabs. Windows becomes very important as well, because when it comes up default, it's going to come up with clear glass and its U values and solar heat gain coefficient. This house has all low E glass, so that right there changes a lot of things, especially with the heating loads in the winter and the summer, because in the summer it's reflecting UV, the radiation, which can add to the heating load of the house. So you can choose different emissivities, and then if you know the U value and solar heat gain coefficient, you should enter those in there, because that's going to change quite a bit for the heating and cooling loads, mainly the cooling loads. Now if we run this again after changing those three things, we change the attic, we change the windows, and we change some of the walls that were in there. We can see now that we're at 26,500 BTUs for cooling, but where we were at 70,000 BTUs for heating, we're now at 43. And that big change overall was the insulation in the floor over the room over the garage, as well as the other changes that we made with regard to that. One last thing that we talked about was when you choose the standard for the cooling loads, the loads of the appliances in the house. It originally said 3,400 BTUs in there based on an average. But if you go in and actually go under custom, you can actually tell it how many plants are in there, because that has to do with the dehumidification that you're going to need. It comes up initially as 5, 5, and 5 in there. Some people have plants, some don't. You look at the occupants. But now if you start adding the appliances that you see, and again, computers and monitors, it could be more than one. Here there's 5. The color TVs, there's 6. All right, you already see with the vented clothes dryer, we're above the 3,400 BTUs that was assumed overall. So now the other thing you can look at is the duct design. Before we had chosen just the above conditioned space. Now if we look at this house actually has notably sealed, but has R8, not R6. So we're going to change it to R8, and then we're going to click on the duct systems. So here it's going to be system generated ducts above conditioned space. If we click on that, we open up a window, a tab that actually I can change the percentage that runs in unconditioned space. So this house says 80% in the attic, 20% conditioned space. So we're just going to change it, and you could change the number of returns, the R value, and where the outlet locations are, whether in the center of the rooms or not. That's in there. Once we redo that, we're going to look at, you can see we now go back to the other system and get the calculation. You can see that these two numbers are getting closer and closer as we dial in the manual J for this. And now we have 38,000 BTUs for the cooling and 43,000 for the heating. So now since we've added all that load from the appliances, this has actually come up to be truer, and these are much closer overall. But our heating loads stayed about the same, but much different than when we didn't have insulation in certain locations in the house. So if we look at the differences from those three steps, we started out here with a high cooling load and a very high heating load that we were going to require. But as you drilled down inside and got very specific, our cooling load went down at first, but then leveled out when we added the appliances. And then once we adjusted the insulation properly, the heating loads stayed about the same. That's in there. So pretty powerful program, fairly easy to use. Once you figure out which buttons to go back into to change things in there, you could probably, if you have some information about this house in general, you could probably get through the initial setup in about 10 minutes and get an idea of where you are. But as you see, if you don't change any of the defaults, which is right here, you're gonna be far off, especially on your heating side. So you have to be careful and make sure you have it modeled properly, and don't just assume that the defaults that the program's using are going to give you what you need with regard to that. So keep an eye out for that. Elite Soft is going to, or any of them are going to be the same. It all depends on what you enter in there with regard to the information. So the more info you have about that home based on your visual inspection, or if you do a virtual walkthrough or an audit with the homeowner and they walk you through, say on FaceTime or whatever, and you could actually see the insulation in the attic, see the thickness of the walls. Some homeowners are not going to know anything about their home with regard to that, so it makes it a lot more difficult. If not, you can use the defaults for something like this just to get an idea of where you're starting with regard to that.
Thanks for watching. To see this whole series and to access additional helpful program content, be sure to visit us often at PSEGLINY.com.